Welcome in everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Friday, July 26th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about the media days that unfolded this week. We'll first get into the Big Ten because that absolutely dominated headlines throughout the week, and then we'll get into the ACC, which absolutely had tons to unfold as well. So we'll get into both of those to start the show. Then we'll get into the season coming up and how it is one of the most unpredictable seasons that I definitely have ever seen, and frankly, I think it's one in a very, very long time that I just cannot get a beat on. So I'll kind of break down exactly what I mean, how it goes through literally every single part of this sport this upcoming year. Then we'll continue on with the biggest four-game stretches for some of the title contenders out there. We have 4 more teams for you. Likely we'll do it on this segment, and then we'll get into hot takes for contenders. We'll do the SEC today, and that will likely wrap that up. Maybe we'll do a group of 5 segment here pretty soon, but as of right now, we're going to lean into the SEC and then just probably finish it out. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all, we get tons of, I apologize for that. Have these all up from yesterday. There we go. If you would like to tip or donate and possibly ask a question on here, you can get your question on the screen, which is obviously a huge help to all of us here, but also to you. If you want to kind of have an interactive experience here, you can use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us, but to you guys. You get to kind of have a fun, interactive experience here, and that's always good for the both of us. But again, that's gsmcpodcast.net if you'd like to use that. But let's jump into the Big Ten Media Day reactions, and there was a ton of stuff that unfolded over the last couple of days in Indianapolis. There was tons of behind-the-scenes news, a couple of little tidbits about realignment that we'll get to in a little bit, but the main thing that I noticed throughout this week is Ohio State's coming forward all this year. They have no issue saying that very, very out loud, very out front, and one of the people kind of leading that charge was Ryan Day in some respects. Ryan Day was a little bit different tenor than I've seen in the past, just a little bit more kind of the same reserved self, but also spoke with a little bit of humility but confidence about this upcoming season, talked about some of the different mistakes that he's made in the first couple of years and how he's kind of gone about fixing those this upcoming year, bringing in guys like Chip Kelly, getting the right players in the right seats, as he's put it. So there's a ton of different things that he's putting into this year, and he just has this, quiet confidence about him that I think he understands what this year is going to mean to so many different Ohio State fans, and he's coming into it with about as much energy and intensity as you could possibly want if you're an Ohio State fan. And then you had Denzel Burke also there. He said very plain and simple, he did not come back for anything but a national title. And I've been someone that has tried to keep myself from saying it is title or bust for this team. I tend to believe that regardless of if you get to the semifinals of a playoff, everything kind of is tossed up in the air at that point. So it's hard for me to say that this has to be a title or bust season, but all the players are saying it, so it's hard for me to necessarily argue with them either. It'll be really, really interesting to see all this unfold. Obviously, none of it matters until you kick off on August 31st and get things going, but it really feels like it's going to be a very fun year out there. Also, another little tidbit from it was it sounds like they used about $2 million on their NIL budget. That was kind of a rumor, so we don't really know what the exact number is. If that's the number, flex the muscles that you have. It's the game that everyone's playing at this very moment, and if Ohio State's playing it better than everyone else, then so be it. But the other person that made a ton of headlines was Lincoln Riley. He had a number of quotes that got the Twitter world a little bit on fire. There's no two ways about that. But the first one, he was talking about Saban and Bama and how they were scheduling in the past to win titles, not to, play the toughest games or to schedule for their fans, as he put it. He schedules to win championships. And frankly, I don't necessarily agree because no matter who you play in the out-of-conference, if you were playing in the SEC West over the last 10 years, you were playing a tough schedule. So that's kind of beside the point. He was talking about the Notre Dame game when he discussed this, and gets me a little bit worried about him not necessarily being as committed to that game as he possibly should, and one game that I absolutely want to keep in the fold, but at the end of the day, if the head coach of one of the bigger teams is not that interested in playing it, there's a real reality where it's taken off the schedule, and I would absolutely hate to see that, but as he said, if you need to schedule some weaker teams to make it into that playoff and possibly win a national title and be healthy while you're doing it, It's hard to argue with that. He also made a comment that really got people up in arms about USC catching up, as he put it, in pretty much every category, from NIL to facilities to talent level, everything in between that he's had to deal with since he showed up. Frankly, he's absolutely right. There's no two ways that USC is not where it should be, and it definitely wasn't when he walked in where it should be in the world of NIL, in the world of facilities, and just putting into this program what should be put into this program. What can be put into this program has not remotely been put in. So I think he's absolutely right about that. It was a little weird and definitely got some Oklahoma fans mad, because that was one of the big reasons he decided to move on to SC, or at least that was one of the big reasons that he said. So I definitely think it's one of those things that he is technically right. If this USC program is operating at the best possible ability, if they are firing on absolutely all cylinders, there's not going to be a lot of teams and programs that are going to be in better shape than them. They are missing on just about every cylinder right about now. And that's the real problem here. And some of it is outside of Lincoln Riley's control. Some of it is above his head. So he's going to have to kind of do his best to make it all work. But as of right now, it just seems like USC is not making the waves that you want them to make. They're not making the progress that you want them to make year over year. And I made a pick yesterday that I think they're going to have a top 70 defense. I'm getting a little bit more worried about that as we get closer to the season and as I hear more and more about what people really think about this defense going into this year. But we'll obviously see how that unfolds. I'm going to hold by that, but it'll definitely be interesting to watch that. Sharon Moore and Michigan were also there, although I'm sure you didn't necessarily hear too much about the reigning national champions because it was a relatively quiet week for the Michigan Wolverines. Not necessarily anything too crazy. One of the big things that did happen, that did come out, was Kirk Campbell and Sharon Moore were talking about their starting quarterback situation and who's going to be the guy under center at the very first snap of the season. Sharon Moore had a quote that just said, the things he's looking for in his starting quarterback: he will take care of the football, he will be a team player, he'll be a playmaker, and he'll put winning first. And then Kirk Campbell was talking about Alex Orji and his chances to be in this offense, whether it's the quarterback or with different in different facets, and he said he is one of the best 11 players on the offense. There's no two ways about that. Now, is he the best quarterback? We'll find out, and that doesn't necessarily bode confidence for me to Alex Orji being the first week starter. If I'm being totally honest, I tend to believe that it might just be Jack Tuttle out there, and I think it's kind of just, you're going to have a good run game. You do have Donovan Edwards, you do have Khalil Mullings, you can use Alex Orji when you want in some different packages, but at the end of the day, the J.J. McCarthy type quarterback is the one that absolutely is going to be the dude. He is absolutely the guy that is going to be someone that totally hits every spot that is a little bit more of that J.J. McCarthy type player, and that was the one that got you that far. So it's really hard for me to say that this is the wrong decision or anything like that. Obviously, it'll unfold much more during fall camp, but as of right now, if I was to bet who's going to be the starter when they trot out there in week 1, I would go towards Jack Tuttle, that's for sure. Congratulations, Anthony. That's absolutely awesome. Very, very happy for y'all. But let's move on to Oregon here, and let's talk about this team just oozes confidence, and not everyone likes it, and not everyone, I've seen a number of people say they don't love the way that they don't love Dan Lanning. Let's just leave it at that. But Dan Lanning absolutely loves this university and is very, very forthright about that. He says everything they do is a little bit different, and he's absolutely right about that. Everything up there in Eugene is just a little bit different than it has been in past years. And he has the roster and everything to do exactly what he wants to do this season, and they came in with that energy. They know that this is a big-time conference. They know that this is a really tough conference they're walking into, but they are not scared at all. And obviously there were a ton of questions around how they've used NIL and recruiting and that type of thing. They did just lose a big-time recruit, Josiah Sharma, to Texas, so a little bit of a blip there for Oregon recruiting, but overall, overall, he's just been doing an incredible job, and people have pointed to NIL a lot as the reasoning for that, and frankly, he just said, if you're not using it, then you're losing, and he's absolutely right. So Oregon has the muscles. They absolutely should be flexing them. If you have the guy that founded Nike in your alumni base and you're not using NIL, you're doing something wrong. That's just the plain truth. Dylan Gabriel was also there, and he talked about his decision to jump over to Oregon. Basically just said it was the easiest decision he's ever made, because when you're walking into a Will Stein offense with Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart and all of the guys around him, it's a very easy decision. Let's just be totally honest with you. And I think him and Oklahoma were kind of moving in separate directions, especially with Jeff Lebby walking out the door. It just felt like that was not going to be, partnership going forward. I think Jackson Arnold deserved to get his shot, and it worked out really best for everyone. So that's definitely something that's going to be huge for them. And frankly, Dylan Gabriel is going to do just incredible work in this offense. I think it fits like an absolute glove, and I think he's one of those guys that maybe it's not an upgrade from Bo Nix. I tend to believe it's a little bit of a downgrade, but if it is, it's not by far by any means. And then you obviously saw the inflatable duck rolling down the White River down over there in Indianapolis, and it's just the PR team. This Oregon PR team absolutely works harder than anyone else, and you will see it plenty in the Big Ten, I can promise you that. And then one of the other big-time conversations was how many teams can actually win this conference. I know we talk about all the teams like Nebraska and Iowa and Wisconsin that are really, really fun teams, but can they win a Big Ten title? And I tend to believe no. And the thing is, you could cut it down even further than that if you really wanted to, because when you look at Ohio State and Oregon, it is really hard to find holes. Now, I can poke holes in Oregon a little bit. I can definitely worry about some of the defensive line stuff really working out the way they want to. Bringing in some of those transfers is a little bit worrisome. Ohio State, Will Howard, I guess, is your biggest question. But if your biggest question is a guy that knocked off a team that went to the title 2 years ago in a Big 12 title, I'm not necessarily worried about that guy. So I think that's more than fine. I just think there's a reality where there's only two teams in this conference that can really win a title. Now, Michigan and Penn State are absolutely sitting there and can make noise in this conversation, but as I see it, there are two teams that are a sort of head and shoulders. I don't necessarily want to say head and shoulders, but they are tier 1. And tier 2, I would say, is Michigan and Penn State, although you could easily make the argument that they're all tier 1 and there's no tier 2 teams in the Big Ten. And then you get down to USC, Nebraska, and all the other teams, and they're more tier 3 teams. So it's a kind of a weird diatribe in this conference where it's really hard to figure out what the pecking order is. Not necessarily at the very top, not necessarily figuring out, going into this year, I think we can all agree it goes Ohio State, Oregon, and then you can go Michigan or Penn State. I kind of lean Penn State, but we can debate on that pretty much all day. But at the end of the day, I do think there are some teams behind them that could blow this entire thing up. Let's say Nebraska plays really good football. Let's say Dylan Raiola comes and absolutely hits the ground running, which is frankly maybe a little bit unfair to him to expect of him, but the reality is it's still a chance. And then what if Iowa puts together a good offense this upcoming year? Both are dangerous teams and could totally turn this thing on its head. So if you were to ask me between, if 7 teams can win it or if 2 teams can win it, I'd lean towards the 2. But at the end of the day, there are a ton of teams that could make noise and kind of throw a wrench into that. That's for sure. But we have some other things here. Deshaun Foster had a relatively awkward opening statement. Not relatively, a very awkward opening statement. But overall, I get it doesn't inspire confidence by any means, but he was awesome in interviews throughout the week, and frankly, his job is to coach football, not to do public speaking. So I'm not necessarily too mad about that. I think it doesn't necessarily tell you that UCLA is going to be terrible under Deshaun Foster. It's just a little bit of an awkward moment. Jonathan Smith absolutely turned heads. It felt like absolutely everyone there was talking about how incredible this coach is and how he's going to build something in that program up in East Lansing that hasn't been there in the last couple of years and could be really dangerous. So it might not be 2024. In fact, it's definitely not going to be 2024 for the Spartans, but 2025 is coming really quick, and they absolutely can make some noise there. No big words on expansion. There were a couple of things kicked around in the ACC that could affect the Big Ten, but overall, nothing too crazy. And then Penn State has some confidence on offense. There's no two ways about that. Definitely something that will be huge for them, but it seems like James Franklin feels really good about Andy Kotelnicki. And then on top of that, you had a little quote from Matt Rule that was a little bit crazy about the Big Ten being the NFL of college football. If you want to go look at the number of players drafted from the SEC over the last 18 years, they're more than welcome, but that would be the NFL of college football. But I don't necessarily disagree with him. I do think 4 teams should get into the playoff every single year from that conference, or at least most years from that conference, and they're absolutely one of the class conferences in the country. But if you're calling it the SEC of college football, I just can't quite agree with that. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to get to the ACC Media Days. Not quite as much to break down from that one, but still plenty from from Charlotte this past week, so we'll break it down right after this.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about the Big Ten Media Days, and Anthony, that is definitely something that USC and UCLA are going to have to adapt to. There's no two ways about that. Those offenses are a little bit more spread out and less Big Ten type offenses. They were mainly brought in because of everything else they bring. They are incredible academic universities, obviously, have really, really strong research funds. So from a football perspective, it's going to be a little bit of a tough stretch for USC and UCLA getting into this conference, but I think on the other side of things, you get plenty from those two, that's for sure. But then let's get into ACC Media Days, and there is a ton to break down here, and it's kind of funny. Going into this one, you thought you were going to hear everything from Florida State and Clemson, and we got plenty from what was going on there. Obviously, we know that they are sticking around in the ACC for at least another year after this one, so we'll get them for a little bit longer, but it felt like Florida State in particular was just a little bit quiet this week, and I wasn't necessarily expecting that, but it does make sense because they're now practicing. They started practice, I believe, on Wednesday, so they were up in Charlotte on Monday, got right back down and got to work for Florida State. So definitely makes sense that they were a little bit quiet, just went about their business and got out of there pretty quickly. Jim Phillips talked about, the ongoing cases between Florida State and Clemson, said they were disappointing and distracting to the other universities in the conference, and frankly, I would agree, but I don't think they necessarily mind being distracted by now if it means they can get into another conference here down the road, which we'll get here into in a second. But also some other people that made noise. Dabo Swinney's just always going to make noise. Every time he's at a podium, he's going to say something that is going to make someone mad. He talked about his anti-portal perception, and he said, "I'm not anti-portal, I'm pro-young men, talented young men that believe in our team, believe in me, that believe in Clemson." And I've gone back and forth on this about a million different times. I tend to believe that he is going about this the wrong way. I think the portal has to be used in today's age if you want to compete for national titles year over year with all of the turnover that happens in a program. all that being said, I really just have to respect this man for saying, this is the way I'm going to go about business. I think this is the right way, not only for our program, but also for these kids. I think this is the right way to go about business, and no amount of headlines and no amount of going after me is going to change that. So while I don't necessarily agree on the approach, I can really respect him standing on that and saying, this is the way we're going to go about business, and I'm going to prove you all wrong and say we don't need to use the portal to win a national title. But then on the Florida State side, DJU absolutely is going to be the talk of the town. He wasn't at Media Days, but once they got back to Tallahassee, he's been making some noise in early parts of practice. It sounds like he's just being very efficient, and that's really all you need from this kid. That was the big worry that I had from him was can he be accurate enough on a consistent enough basis for this team to win the games that they need to win down the stretch. And if he's doing it in practice early on, then maybe he's a really dangerous player and can have a really good season for Florida State. So it's one of those things that I've been a little bit hesitant for him, but the ceiling is super high. There's no two ways about that, and absolutely can be that dude. And Anthony, I tend to agree. There is some issues in that conference commissioner chair for the ACC that are not going to be fixed anytime soon. Let's just put it that way, and it might be not too great for the conference. But also, there was a report that Florida State, Clemson, as we already know, but Miami, UNC, NC State, Virginia Tech are all looking out of ways from the ACC grant of rights. It also sounds like the Big Ten might be looking to poke some holes in the behind the scenes. So I just got to imagine that once we get to that negotiation, I think in February for this ESPN contract for ACC, it's not going to go well for the ACC. That's just my gut feeling right now, and there are a lot of things that are pointing me in that direction. But let's get to Miami, and let's talk about the way they walked into this thing. And I think there's obviously a ton of hype around this team. There's obviously going to be some people that absolutely hate that there's hype around this team that say, we do this every year with Miami, they're not going to be any good again, all this stuff. And then there's people on the other side, and there's people that are really excited about this team. I tend to be in that group because I think they're about as dangerous as really any team, especially in the ACC, but maybe even in the country, and it's really because of the guy under center. He's an absolute beast. Mario Cristobal talked just incredibly glowingly about Cam Ward, said he is an alpha leader. He is someone that every time he shows up to practice, everyone knows they have to elevate their game a little bit more. And that's what you want out of your quarterback. He doesn't need to be the most vocal guy in the world, although that is exactly what Cam Ward is. If you saw that video between him and Shedeur Sanders, he's a vocal guy. Whether it's good or not, time will tell. But at the end of the day, he is definitely someone that is a vocal leader, and he's someone that's getting praised just all over the place in Coral Gables right now. So this team has a lot of hype going into the season. There's no two ways about that. He can do so many incredible things this year and bring this team back to where they want to be, where they absolutely want to be, which is at the very head of the table. They don't want to be a team that, just competes for ACC titles. They want to win them, and they want to win them multiple years in a row. So this might just be the year where everything gets rolling, and frankly, you'll find very quickly that if the Miami ball gets rolling, then it's going to be incredibly hard to stop it. But that's something that we'll figure out likely after this season. Louisville made some noise in this conference, obviously coming off a huge year where they went to the title game against Florida State. But overall, this is a team that I've been pretty forthcoming about that I just don't necessarily love all that much. I think Tyler Shuck is a little bit of a downgrade at quarterback, and I think they're riding margins last year especially that they're not necessarily going to be able to match this year. Now, all of that being said, Jeff Brom is an absolute beast. He can do so many incredible things with his offense where I can look at the team and not necessarily feel super great about the guys on it, and then they go out and win 10 games. Frankly, it happened last year. I didn't necessarily love Jack Plummer going into last season, and he had a great season. Now, he was coming from the offense with Jeff Brom from Purdue, so that's a little bit different of a situation, but definitely something that is going to be really, really awesome to watch. And when you have a D-line like they have with Ashton Gillette kind of leading the way, you can do a lot of really special things. So I'm trying not to write off Louisville too much, but definitely not the team that I'm circling going into this offseason. But SMU was also there. They came in swinging. I really, really like the energy from the Ponies this time around because they came in with a ton of different guys. 2 different quarterbacks were in attendance, Ken Jennings and Preston Stone. It does sound like both those quarterbacks will get run this upcoming year in some form or another. Kevin Jennings did an incredible job in the AAC championship a year ago, so it's not necessarily crazy to think that they're going to be the guys that you want to get on the field. I tend to believe that Preston Stone will be the normal go-to guy, the number one guy. But at the end of the day, if you need Kevin Jennings, he is absolutely ready to go. There's no two ways about that. They're coming off, a CFP 25 finish, a really, really good quarterback in Preston Stone, a strong defense, a manageable schedule. All of the stuff is really going in SMU's direction. And frankly, I keep coming back to that Florida State game in Dallas. If they win that game, this entire conference is turned on its head, and it's one that they can win. I almost promise you that. So it's going to be really, really interesting to watch that one unfold. Obviously, Preston Stone is a huge part of this program and is going to be the guy that when you look back at this year for SMU, and if they win 9-10 games, you're going to look at Preston Stone's numbers and just be absolutely flabbergasted by what he was able to do this year. But among Preston Stone, we also had some other veteran quarterbacks that made some waves throughout this because it didn't matter who you were at this conference, whether it was Preston Stone or Haynes King or Kyron Drones. They all came in saying, we want to attack this conference and we expect to win this conference. That's just the reality. We are not afraid of this conference anymore because, frankly, there's an open seat at the top. I agree that, Florida State is coming in as the reigning champions and Clemson is coming in as the team that has dominated for the last decade. I don't see either of them as firmly sitting on that top seat. Now, both of them absolutely have the most claim to that top seat. There's no two ways about that, but there's an opening here for a number of teams to make some noise, and especially if Clemson and Florida State are finding their way out, you would be in a position where you could garner a lot of power moving forward in the ACC, at least over the next little bit while the ACC is still a thing, but that's beside the point. We had Kyron Drones there. Him and Brent Pry were very, very honest and simple about what they wanted this season. They want to win an ACC title, and it would be disappointing if they didn't. And I absolutely love that energy. That is absolutely what you need out of Blacksburg right now because it's no longer time to build out. It's no longer time to, put the pieces together and make sure you're in the good shape. You have it all, and you have tons of guys from returning a year ago, and it's time to attack this conference. So really, really love the aggression from that. Also, another really cool thing that I've noticed across pretty much every single media days is guys getting asked about this college football 25 game, being in it, how cool that is. And it's always awesome to see the emotion from these guys when they get that news and they kind of just realize that it's all reality being in that game. It's been really cool to see all the reactions from those guys and some of the quotes that they've had. But overall, the ACC, maybe it wasn't quite as explosive as we thought, but it definitely gave us plenty. There's no two ways about that. It gave us, Florida State and Clemson are staying put for the time being, but once they leave, they might just be pulling a ton of other guys with them. So that'll obviously be really, really interesting to watch and something that we'll definitely unpack as the season goes on. But right now, we're going to take our second break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the season ahead, and I'm going to make my picks, all of my picks next week, so definitely tune in for those shows, but I'm going to unload on you guys for a second here about how this is the most unpredictable season I have seen in my lifetime, although it's not been that long. But overall, this is one of those seasons that I just cannot get a beat on for the life of me. So I'll break down exactly what I mean right after this. So stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the stuff out of ACC Media Days, a ton of stuff to break down from there. Obviously, Florida State and Clemson were kind of the main event, but plenty of other stuff to break down from that. But let's jump into segment 3 here. And I cannot get a beat on this season to save my life. There are a number of picks that I'm going to put out throughout next week. I'll break down the schedule at the end of this segment, but overall, I can't get a beat on any of these teams, on any of these conferences, on the title race, on the playoff, everything in between. It feels like it has a million different questions. So I'll get into exactly what I mean here, and I want to start with the playoff because, frankly, I don't know how many teams can actually win the national title. I've gone back and forth on this about a million times throughout the offseason where some days I'll wake up and say, man, there are 13 or 14 teams that absolutely can make some noise in this, and if they catch fire at the right time or they're healthy at the right time, can really go into the playoff and possibly win this thing. And then on the other side of things, I'm thinking there's 16 or 17 games that you have to win now to possibly win a national title, and there's 4 teams in the country, as I see it, that have the depth, that have all of the kind of boxes checked to the degree that you need to make that happen. And it's Ohio State and Oregon, and then it's UGA and Texas. Those are the teams that stand out to me when it comes to don't have to just play their first 22. They can play 44 guys. They can play 66 guys, and it's really, really a remarkable thing that not too many teams across the country have the ability to do this year. Now, there are some teams that are plenty deep and absolutely have the ability to make runs when they need to, but these are the teams that can have some things go wrong, and they still are able to make that noise. But on the flip side of that, you absolutely have some teams like Tennessee, like Ole Miss, like Bama even, Penn State, Michigan, that are good enough teams to win a national title. It's just things kind of have to fall into place a little bit better. So when I try to figure out how many teams can actually win a national title, I start with those 4. Those 4 I feel are very, very solid. Ohio State, UGA, Texas, and Oregon absolutely can win a national title. Now, you get into a little bit deeper in the weeds, you can absolutely talk me into Miami. You can talk me into Florida State, Clemson. You can talk me into Kansas State making a crazy run, Utah possibly. You can talk me into a ton of Big Ten teams, including especially the other 2 other than Ohio State and Oregon that are at the top. So it's impossible to get a beat on what it's going to take to win this national title because it's totally new and how many teams actually have that thing. So right now, I think you could say there's only 4 teams that can actually win a national title, and I probably wouldn't argue with you too much. You could say there's 12 teams that can win a national title, and I probably wouldn't argue with you too much. It's impossible for me to really get a good beat on who actually can win and who's going to come up short and why they're going to come up short has been just incredibly hard to pin down. But on top of this, every single conference has big-time questions that I have no idea how the conference is going to go. And we'll start with the Big Ten here. And this one is the most straightforward as I see it. You know, you do have Michigan still there. Penn State has a really good squad. You have USC, Iowa, Nebraska, Wisconsin, and even Washington that could absolutely turn this thing on its head in any weekend throughout the season. But Oregon and Ohio State are standing above these teams. They are just a cut above from a talent level, from quarterback play. I think it's going to be a little bit higher level or a little bit more consistent level at those 2 at the very least. So I think when I just look at those teams, they stand just a little bit above. And not necessarily to say, Michigan and Penn State or some of these other teams couldn't make that run to Indianapolis, but it really feels like these guys are on a collision course, and it could change throughout the season. Oregon going to Michigan might be the decider there, but overall, it's one of those things that just impossible to get a beat on how many teams are actually going to be a problem in that conference. Right now, I lean that there's only really 2 that have a big-time real shot to win this conference, but who knows? It's going to be absolutely crazy to see this one unfold. SEC is a little bit more variable because, frankly, there are about 7 or 8 teams that I could picture winning 10 games. I go through their schedule and I say, yeah, I mean, it totally makes sense for them to only lose 2 of these on the schedule and keep it moving into the playoff, but not everyone can do that. Whether it's LSU, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Missouri, Bama, Texas, UGA, someone's going to have a disappointing season. Someone's going to miss out on the playoff. In fact, probably multiple of these teams are going to miss out on the playoff. I would argue of those seven I just named, at least three are not making the playoff field, and I don't know who those are going to be. I could poke holes in LSU pretty easily with that back-end defense. I think Missouri, you could very easily tell me, is going to take a big step back this year. Bama has problems on the defensive back end, and really in the defense as a whole, I'm a little bit nervous about how good they're going to be on that side of the ball. Tennessee, you never really know what you're getting from Nico Iamaleava, although I think he's absolutely incredible. I think he's going to be really awesome. You don't know until he gets on the field. And then Ole Miss is one of those teams that everyone seems to know exactly what's going to happen, but when you add that many transfers to the defensive side of the ball with a guy like Pete Golding, who I don't necessarily love too much, I don't necessarily think it's as cut and dry as some people think. And then you have A&M and OU just kind of lurking in the background that absolutely could throw a wrench into the entire thing. So the SEC is definitely a little bit more variable. The ACC is the one that is almost impossible to get a beat on because I can't get a beat on the top three teams in this conference. I think Clemson is going to play really good defense. I think Florida State is going to play really good defense. I think Miami is going to be dangerous in a number of different ways, and Cam Ward's going to have a good season. I don't know what all that means when it comes to the ACC title race. I don't know, what is Clemson going to do on the offensive side of the ball? How does Cade Klubnik look in that offense, and how comfortable does he look? Florida State, can DJU make the plays that need to be made down the stretch to win a title? Miami, adding a lot of transfers is always something that you're walking a bit of a tightrope, and if you can find a way to make it all work, then you're going to be a really talented team and a really good team, but there's always the flip side of that where it just doesn't come together the way you want, and it kind of leads to a disappointing season. And then you have teams lurking in the background that have plenty to say about this conference. Virginia Tech, NC State, Louisville, SMU, all are teams that absolutely can make some noise and totally change this conference on a Saturday. So it's going to be wild, this one, but the number one wild conference is the Big 12. It's the one that every single week you will look up and see a one-score, last-second type game in the Big 12 because there's no team that is leaps and bounds ahead of others. There's about 10 teams in this conference that I could realistically paint a path to them getting to the title game. Now, some were a little bit longer than others. I think Colorado is a team that does have a relatively long shot to make the title game and to win this conference, but they absolutely can do it. If Shedeur Sanders is upright from the majority of this season, they're as dangerous as pretty much any team in this conference. Utah and KSU are the teams that I tend to believe are a cut above. You can add Oklahoma State into that conversation if you'd like, but I tend to believe KSU and Utah are just the tier 1 teams here, but then Oklahoma State, Kansas, Arizona, UCF are not far behind them by any means. So that conference is going to be just about impossible to pin down. So long story short, I've switched every single pick for every single conference about 5 different times before I've started really putting, as I've started kind of putting together what I think is going to happen. So I'll have the Big Ten ready on Monday, and I will feel as confident as I possibly can, but I can't promise it's going to be super confident, I'll be honest. But then you have the Heisman Trophy that I think is going to be off the charts incredible this year. There's so many guys that absolutely can make a run at this, and tons of really explosive, fun offenses out there. And then you have Clemson, you have Utah that absolutely can make some noise, and maybe Cam Rising or Cade Klubnik or someone that make their way into this conversation. And you have someone like Carson Beck leading the way there. He is someone that, as of right now, I'm leaning that direction. Obviously, that could change before Friday when I make that pick, but overall, this is a really, really talented guy and definitely someone that, if you want to make the safe pick for Heisman, I don't think you can necessarily go wrong with Carson Beck. But on the other side of that, you have a ton of other awards that are going to be just impossible to pin down. You have a ton of running backs and wide receivers that are working for the Heisman or the Biletnikoff or the Doak Walker. Those are going to be incredible battles top to bottom. But then the defensive awards are going to be absolutely crazy. On the interior defensive line, you have incredible duos in Ann Arbor and in South Bend that absolutely will make some noise in that conversation. And then you have James Pierce Jr., you have Michael Williams, Reuben Bain, Caleb Downs, Malachi Starks, all guys that absolutely can win a Nagurski Trophy and be the best player on the defensive side of the ball this year. So it's just going to be incredible. Add into all of that we have a playoff coming up that no one really knows how it's going to go. No one knows how the last couple of weeks of the season are going to go. Are people going to get rested because you're already in the conference title? Are there going to be upsets at the end of the season that totally switch things up? Is there going to be a 9-3 team that makes their conference title and then wins it and gets into the playoff? And how does that work for the other team on the other side, but that was 11-1 walking into that game? There are a million different variables that are going to come into play throughout the season, and it's one of those seasons that you can do your best to kind of pinpoint what's going to happen throughout the season. You can do your best to figure out, this is the way the Big Ten's going to go. This is the way the SEC is going to go. This is the way the ACC is going to go, and the Big 12 in the playoff. But I don't think anyone has an idea. I think everyone's just kind of throwing darts at the wall, and frankly, that's probably what I'll be doing next week. But overall, I think it's going to be a really, really fun exercise. Let's get into the schedule here, and we'll start with the Big Ten on Monday. We'll get into all of the stuff that you need to know. I'll give quick thoughts on every team, obviously some quicker than others, respectfully. Then we'll get into a record pick for all, kind of a fool's errand, but I'll give it to you guys none the same. Championship matchup and winner, definitely, absolutely, we'll give that. And then I'll give the Offensive Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, newcomer, so transfer or freshman, either or, don't necessarily care one way or the other. Maybe I'll give a freshman and a transfer one, who knows, but and then I'll give the Coach of the Year. So that's what you'll get from every conference. You'll get the Big Ten, which has a dash instead of a colon, which is weird, but Tuesday you'll get the SEC, Wednesday ACC, and Thursday Big 12. I just broke it down on how hard it's going to be to pick these conferences, frankly. And then you'll get the playoff and the postseason awards, the Heisman, the Blitnikoff, all of those, maybe even an All-American team in there on Friday. So it's about time to get this thing started. We're under a month from this thing really getting underway, at least week 0, which is what I count down to, but that's to each their own on that one. I think this season is going to be off the walls incredible. I was walking into last season, and I was about as excited as I've ever been for a college football season. There was so much going into that year, and I absolutely loved that it was kind of the end of an era, and there was so much to get into, but this one absolutely dwarfs the excitement that I had a year ago, because the amount of things that can happen is just going to be off the wall. So your guess is as best as mine. I will give my best guess on next week's shows, but overall, just cannot wait for this season and the chaos to start. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the biggest 4-game stretches for some big-time title contenders. This will likely be our last one around. We've done 12 teams, or we will have done 12 teams at the end of this, and definitely feel like that's likely where I draw the line at the very most. But we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just did a little bit of a breakdown of all of the craziness that can happen this upcoming season, how it's one of the more unpredictable seasons that I've seen in my lifetime for sure, but I think it goes back even further than that, if I'm being totally honest. But let's get into some of the top contenders' biggest 4-game stretches. Obviously, this is going to be kind of just the moment where we realize this is a national title contender, not just a team that had that moniker going into the season. This is when they kind of realize that and become that team. So let's get into this, and let's start with the Ole Miss Rebels. And I think for me, it starts at LSU on October 12th. We've talked about October 12th a ton on this segment, and it's because there's a lot of really good games on October 12th, but just cannot wait for that week. And also can wait for that week because that's week 7 and it's halfway through the schedule. But that's beside the point. We'll get into that throughout the season. At LSU is absolutely huge. I talked about it with, I will talk about it with LSU here in a second. This is the game for both of these teams. I think this is the game where they separate themselves, where they say, we're a little bit closer to the Texas and the Georgias and maybe even the Bamas of the world than we are to the Ole Misses of the world. This is kind of the separate paths. It could be the decider between, who makes it between these two teams, because going into the season, you have Georgia, you have Texas, you have Bama leading the way for odds to win this conference, and then you have USC, Ole Miss, and LSU, and those might be the two that break paths. That might be one gets left out at the end of the day, one gets in, and this could be the game that decides that. So absolutely huge for them, and definitely a game that could be really, really interesting. Oklahoma coming to Oxford could not come at a worse time for Ole Miss, if I'm being totally honest. You have a very, very emotional game at LSU the week before, and whether you win or lose, you're walking to that game with some different emotions than you'd like, and then OU is going to be as motivated as ever. Whatever the schedule is going to be, whatever your record is at this very moment, they're a team that is going to walk in and give you 100% every single time. And this is a game that if Ole Miss wants to take that next step into the upper echelon of the SEC, these are the games that you win on a yearly basis. Maybe they nip you, once every 4 or 5 years, but overall, these are the games that Alabama has made a living off just winning over and over and over again, whether it's Tennessee or it's Ole Miss or some of these other teams that have been lurking around. That's the reason that they have been so dominant, because pretty much every time they walked into the building with Tennessee, it was a win. So that's obviously the big moniker here and what Ole Miss wants to do this year. And then going to Arkansas would be totally fine if UGA wasn't on the other side of it, because that is the game that you are absolutely looking forward to the most with Ole Miss this year, and it's going to be impossible to keep these guys fully engaged in that game. It's not to say that they can't go in and get a big win and can't be focused enough to get that win, but it is to say this is the one where things could get a little bit sketchy for them. If you walk into Fayetteville not fully prepared, they can jump on you pretty quickly and definitely be a very, very dangerous atmosphere to walk into. And then Georgia coming to town it's where you ascend to the next level. It's where you become not only a national title contender, but maybe the team that everyone expects to win it. If you can have Georgia walk into your building and absolutely dominate them, or at least get a win, it doesn't necessarily matter how well you play, but if you can get a win on the board against Georgia, you are in a really, really good shape. And overall, I mean, you're looking at it, and Ole Miss has all of the pieces. Everything is in place for this team to be dangerous. Can they deliver? It will be a very, very interesting conversation, and one way or the other, we're going to have a lot of very passionate Ole Miss fans at the end of the year. And then you had LSU, starts at the exact same place. Ole Miss on October 12th, same exact reasoning. They absolutely, if they're going to get this one done, or if they're going to get to the playoff, they absolutely have to get this one done. No two ways about that. Going to Arkansas should be a fun one, definitely in the middle of a stretch that is going to be really tough for them, so could cause the same problems that it would for Ole Miss on the other side of this. So definitely will be one that they just have to take care of business, have to, take care of the ball and keep it on moving. Because if they do get tripped up in that game, that could be the difference between them and getting into the playoff. And then going to A&M is super interesting for a number of reasons. You do get a bye after this before the Bama game, which is very, very nice for LSU fans. But overall, I think this is one where you could get tripped up very easily. Walking into Kyle Field and not being able to guard a deep pass, especially if someone like Connor Wegman really gets rolling this year, could be the death of this team in particular. So I think it's one of those games that it is absolutely huge for LSU to win this one, keep moving, go into that bye week, and then into that Bama game with a lot of energy and a lot of momentum. And then the Bama game, you finally feel like you are able to beat this team. I understand that LSU has been one of the teams that has been able to nip Alabama and Saban from time to time, and definitely has played closer games with them throughout the years. But overall, this is the way that everyone feels about Bama going into this year. They finally feel like they are attackable. They finally feel like the boogeyman's gone, and maybe they have a chance to make some noise against this team. Now, do they? It'll be really interesting to watch that. But overall, this one's going to be a lot of points, and it's going to be really, really fun to watch, that's for sure. LSU has a chance to improve just a little bit defensively and make the college football playoff. I think this offense is going to be really awesome, and this is a stretch where if you walk out of it 3-1 or better, you're in really good shape. I'll just leave it at that. Definitely a team that could make some noise, and if they go 3-1 in this stretch, then they're making plenty of noise already. But then let's get into Clemson. Theirs starts after week 1, if you were to ask me, because frankly, if you are going to lose that opener to UGA, which is where I'm leaning right now. It could be a much closer game than I'm giving it credit for, but right now I just see UGA on a little bit different of a plane than Clemson. But right after that, you got to bounce back. You got to be ready to roll, and App State is not rolling in there to lose. I can almost promise you that. They are a team that can play with a lot of teams across the country. They're not necessarily on the physicality level of Clemson, and Clemson should be able to handle business. There's no two ways about that, but App State's coming in there with as much energy, with nothing to lose, and if Clemson had just lost a game to UGA and are a little bit down in the dumps, or on the other side, if they just won a huge game against UGA and are overlooking App State a little bit, this one could be a little bit more dangerous than it looks like on paper. And then NC State comes to town. That's obviously going to be a huge one for so many different reasons, and might just shape the tone of this conference going forward throughout the year, because if NC State pulls this one off, then both these schools, both these programs are moving in totally different directions. Maybe NC State's heading on to an ACC title game. Maybe Clemson's heading on to a very disappointing season and making some fans pretty mad. But overall, this should be kind of a physicality gap type thing more than anything else. I think Clemson just has more dudes on the offensive and defensive line, so it should be a win, but it's one of those that you never really know what you're going to get out of NC State, and especially if they beat that team, if they beat that Tennessee team in week 2, then we're having a real conversation around this one when it comes around. And then you have Stanford. Again, this one's a layup. I love the Cardinal. I'm not trying to disrespect the Cardinal, but respectfully, if you're losing this game to Stanford this year, then you have no business being anywhere near the playoff or anywhere near an ACC title, and you won't be. So I think this is one where they just absolutely have to flex their muscles and just keep it moving, because they got a huge game right after that. They go to Tallahassee to face Florida State. It's the big one. It's been the big one the last 3 years in the ACC. It is absolutely the one this year. And if Clemson's going to make the noise they want to, this is the one they got to win. So Clemson's under pretty much as much pressure early on in the season as really anyone, with Georgia, NC State, Florida State all on the schedule. So they got to get off to a good start. I don't know if it's 4-1 or 3-2 that could keep them intact, but overall they got to at least get I'm going to say they at least got to get 4 of these wins and at least got to be rolling into this season with a lot of confidence and at least this offense moving the ball really effectively. And then finally, let's get into Michigan here real quickly. And Oregon's coming to town on November 2nd, and this one's kind of just a message sender. This is the one where you can put the new kid back in his seat and say, this is still our conference. Us and Ohio State are the class of this conference, and it's going to take longer than 1 year for you to pull this off. So this would be just a kind of message sender than anything else, and let everyone know, including Oregon, that Michigan is still one of the class teams in this conference, and they're not just going to walk in and dominate them right away. Going to Indiana is one of those games that frankly shouldn't be too big of a problem, but once you get down to November, Indiana could be a very different team than they are in September, and I think it could be a team that is a little bit dangerous and could cause some problems. I don't necessarily think it's going to be too big of a problem because the physical nature of Michigan should get them to a win, but overall, it's definitely one that we should be watching just a little bit closer once it comes around. And then Northwestern should be a layup. It's definitely a team that is coming in with a lot of energy this year. David Braun has done an incredible job after being thrust into some not so great situations a year ago, but got 6 wins a year ago, did a really, really great job with that team, and it definitely has some questions going into this year for Northwestern, but you're going to get 110% of their effort. I can promise you that every single Saturday. So very much like this team, a really, really good team going into this year, and although Michigan should probably roll over them, I'm very excited to see what Northwestern can be. And then at Ohio State, it's the big one. It's the one that you really want to win. If you can do the thing that absolutely pretty much everyone is picking against you in and beat this Buckeyes team for a 4th straight year, you would upset not only that team, not only those players, not only those coaches, not only that fan base, but you might just turn this program on its head for a little bit, because there would be people asking for Ryan Day's job. There would be people asking for a million different things to happen around there, and it could cause a little bit of turmoil that is not too easy to come back from. So this could be the moment where Michigan kind of buries their opponent and does something that A lot of people, including myself, tend to believe that they can't do at this moment, but if they do it, it's going to be absolute turmoil in Columbus, Ohio. I can promise you that. So Michigan can send a message this year. There's no two ways about that. They can tell everyone, everyone that's saying they don't have a shot to win the national title, everyone saying that they can't make a playoff run, that they're not the team that they were a year ago, and they're not, but they're still really good, and they absolutely have the ability to make some noise. So if they go 3-1 in those games, then this is a team that absolutely can make the playoff, and then physicality might just take over. So it's going to be awesome to watch that team. One of those teams that is really, really hard to get a beat on how good they're actually going to be. But let's take our fourth break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the hot takes for the contenders in the SEC. We have worked our way through every single conference thus far, and now it's time for the SEC, and we'll get into that right after this. So stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the big time stretches for the title contenders out there, gave you 4 games that they absolutely are circling on that schedule as the moment where they really become title contenders, not just the team that has that moniker going into the season, but the team that is realizing that throughout the season. So that'll be really fun to watch, but let's get into hot takes around the conference contenders. It is time for the SEC. We have worked our way through every other Power 4 conference, so let's get to the SEC here really quick, and let's start with Texas, because there is a ton going into this year for the Longhorns, and it starts pretty quickly. They get a Week 2 game up in Ann Arbor against Michigan. I think they win that game by double digits. I'm looking at this game more and more as we get closer and closer, and frankly, it's going to be really hard to beat this team by a lot of points because the physicality of Michigan is going to be really tough. They're going to slow you down. They're going to run the ball, all of that different stuff. But when I look at these two teams, there is a strength on Michigan's side. It tends to be a strength on Texas' side. If there is a weakness on Michigan's side, it tends to be a little bit of a question mark on Texas' side. So it feels like it just matches up really well for Texas to be able to exploit some of the things that Michigan is going to have trouble on defensively. And when you have a really good interior defensive line, it really helps when you have one of the best offensive lines in the country on the other side of the ball. When you have, players on the back end that might not be quite as experienced as you'd like him to be, it's really helpful when you have a third-year quarterback in Quinn Ewers that can put the ball pretty much wherever he needs to put it at a moment's notice. So I don't necessarily think this one's going to get out of control and Texas is going to win by 21 or 30 points or anything crazy like that. But I do think a 10 to 14 point win absolutely makes sense. I think it's kind of like the Bama game from a year ago where they just kind of hold court for the most of the game. They hold the pace, they control pretty much most of the things going on in that game and walk out with a, not necessarily a comfortable win, but one that they feel really good about going forward. So overall, I think Michigan can make it really tough on them. I think the pass rush is one of those things that could get a little bit dangerous for Quinn Ewers, but overall, I just see this Texas team walking in and being able to make enough plays to win by 10, 14 points in Ann Arbor to open their season, and then they're off running into the SEC play. But let's move over to Georgia, and let's talk about these receivers, because I've had this take for pretty much the entire offseason, but I don't think any of these receivers is going to top maybe 700, 750 yards, but they're still going to have plenty of production across the board. When you talk about the number of guys that they have in that room, it is just out of this world ridiculous. Dominic Lovett is going to be the guy leading the way. There's no doubt about that in my mind, but Right behind him, you have tons of other guys. Ra Thomas is ready to make some more noise. London Humphreys is a fantastic player that whenever the ball's in his hands, he can score a touchdown. Colby Young is one of the better 50-50 players in the entire country. Dylan Bell is as dynamic as any player you have seen on a football field. And then Arian Smith can just go. He is someone that is absolutely going to make a number of big-time plays down the field for them this year. And then on top of that, you have two really good tight ends. You have Oscar Delp and Ben Urasek that can absolutely catch the ball out of the backfield, particularly Urasek in that respect, and they're just going to be spreading the rock around so much. And I don't necessarily think any one receiver or tight end is absolutely going to light the world on fire, but they're going to do plenty on offense. They're going to make it really tough for defenses to key in on one guy and be able to stop him and hope that that's enough. So it's going to be really awesome to watch that, and an offense that I'm really excited to see just because there's not a play that they're going to attack you from the same direction, from the same person as they did the play before. So absolutely love this offense, and it's going to be a really fun one to watch. But let's get into the Bama defense. I have way too many questions around the Bama defense, and it's weird because you usually have very few questions around this Bama defense, but as I go into this year, I really worry about this back end, and I think it's possible that this back end cost them a trip to the college football playoff, because as I'm looking more and more into this playoff and I'm trying to make my decisions on who's going to win what games and who's going to make the playoff and everything in between, I don't know if 9-3 is good enough. I'll be totally honest. I think there's so many teams in the Power 4 that are capable of going 10-2, 11-1, making their conference title, possibly winning it, and just causing too much of a logjam for those 9-3 teams to get in regardless of who you lose to. So I think if you're Bama, you have a UGA team coming to town that we just talked about. If you don't have a good back end by that point in the season and you have 8 guys that you have to cover on the UGA offense, you're not going to be successful. That's just the plain honest truth. It's going to be nearly impossible to keep up with all these guys that you need to. Now, they could be much better than I'm giving them credit for, but right now it just looks like a very questionable area. And then Tennessee is going to attack them the exact same way. LSU, the exact same way. Oklahoma is going to come to town and do it the exact same way with Jackson Arnold. So you absolutely have to be ready on the back end of this defense, or there's going to be enough teams that are going to attack you just time and time again to where they're going to break through. They're going to make enough plays to beat you, and then maybe you're sitting at 9-3 at the end of the season and you're right on that bubble. But at the end of the day, I think this back end defense is going to be a bit of a problem for this Alabama team, and enough of a problem to keep them from doing what they want to do this upcoming season. But that'll be obviously a very, very interesting thing to watch week over week, how much better they get, and maybe by the time the LSU game comes around, they're absolutely locked down, but I don't necessarily see that being the case. LSU, on the other hand, has the same exact problems, frankly. When you talk about the defensive side of the ball, it is an absolute nightmare. When you talk about the quarterback, though, I have very few questions. I think this guy is going to make an all-SEC team. I think that's how good he is. He has to jump over at least 4 quarterbacks that are absolutely better than him right now. When you talk about Carson Beck, Quinn Ewers, Jalen Milroe, and Jackson Dart, I can comfortably say all those guys are better than Garrett Nussmeier as we walk into the season. When we're walking out, I do not think that's going to be the case. I think he has so many dudes on the outside. Kyron Lacey is an absolute beast. Chris Hilton is a dude, especially down the field. CJ Daniels coming over from Liberty is going to play a big-time role. Adam Anderson is a really fun player. And then you just add in one of the best tight ends in the country in Mason Taylor. So this is going to be so many guys to throw the ball to, and in an offense that was really lucrative a year ago and is likely going to be kind of the same, at least passing style, this time around. He's going to put up just stupid numbers, and I think he's absolutely going to be a guy that, especially behind that incredible O-line that they're going to have, he's going to have plenty of time to pick apart defenses, and you're going to figure out in a hurry that is not the way you want to play Garrett Nussmeier. But moving on to Ole Miss here, I just think they're going to miss a golden opportunity in 2024. And frankly, I looked at their schedule and I looked at their roster, and all of it looks really good. I'll be totally honest with you. It's not like I'm sitting here and saying, they're going to lose this game and this game and this game for these reasons. I just don't think this team is ready for this moment. It sounds crazy to say. It's more of a gut feeling than anything else, but they brought in so many transfers, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I don't think Pete Golding is necessarily the guy that makes championship level play calls. I think he's a good play caller. I think he's a good defensive coordinator. I don't think he's a championship level defensive coordinator, and frankly, that was the reason he wasn't at Bama as long as he was. So I think that's one of those things where I like this team, and they have so much going for them, and they could go 10-2 and make the playoff and absolutely make a run, but there's so much that they can do this year where they can be an SEC championship team. They can be a national title winner, and they can totally change this program forever. A 10-2 season where even if you make the playoff, if you lose in the first round, I don't know if it does all that much. So I'm debating whether or not they're in the playoff or they're not in the playoff. Regardless, I think they're missing a golden opportunity to make some noise and to totally flip their program on its head this year, because there's a lot more at play than just getting to the playoff. There is a ton more that this program can do this year, and I don't know. I have this gut feeling that at some point in the season, we're going to look up and Ole Miss is going to lose a game that they're not supposed to lose, and we're going to be a little bit dumbfounded around this team. So whether it's, the defense that cost them in Pete Golding, or it's some of the offensive struggles, which tend to be less of a worry, or it's the offensive line that is totally rebuilt and could be a little bit sketchy. It's just, there's too many questions in my eyes. But let's move along here. Tennessee, I think, will be a very fun team. I still think they're going to lose to the big dogs out there. I still don't think they're on the level of the UGAs or the Bamas or some of the other teams that they're going to face off against. And it's not that they absolutely cannot be on that level, because Nico Iamaleava holds a ton of energy here. He holds a ton of power when you go into this season, and they can make some noise. There's no two ways about that, but he has to walk into Sanford Stadium to play that game. He has to play a Bama team that is walking in with as much confidence, as much energy, and as much reason to take that game seriously as they ever have been. And he has some really veteran play callers he's going to have to go up against on the defensive side of the ball in Kirby Smart more Glenn Schumann, but that's kind of a collaborative effort. Kane Womack is going to do an incredible job calling that defense. I don't know if you're going to be able to tear them apart. You might be able to on that back end like I just talked about, but overall, this is a team that could go 10-2, 11-1. They could go 8-4, 9-3. It really comes down to that guy right there. If Nico Iamaleava can be the player that we're all talking about, that we're all building him up to be, then absolutely they can make some noise. I just worry this is still a first-time starter. This is still a guy that's going into his first year as the full-time starter of this team, and although I think he's going to be an incredible quarterback for them and could win a national title there, I don't know if it's going to be in 2024. I do think some of those bounce of ball plays could just be the difference for this team and could cause some problems for them. Although I love this team, I worry that Tennessee is not going to be able to compete with the teams that you're going to have to compete with if you want to win an SEC title and if you want especially to win a national title. And then finally, Missouri. Missouri is one of those teams that is really, really hard to get a beat on going into this year. Really, really hard to figure out where they fit into this entire world of the SEC right now. But I feel pretty comfortable saying Missouri is going to take a step back this year. And it's not necessarily a huge step back. I think they could easily take a step back and still go 10-2 against the schedule. But overall, a lot of things went their way a year ago. Brady Cook was not a very accurate quarterback a year ago. There were a number of plays that he did make that were really incredible, but if you look back at the accuracy rate, it was not where you wanted it to be. That's for sure, and I think it's one of those things where you just have to play more consistent football to be able to compete in this conference year over year. I think Brady Cook is a really good player and absolutely someone that can make some noise in this conference. I just worry there's going to be moments where last year maybe there was a pick that was dropped. It won't be dropped this year. Or maybe a fumble bounced right back to the player. It's not going to do that this year. So it's kind of one of those things where it might just be the luck coming back down to earth for them. But overall, I mean, they do have a really manageable schedule. They go to A&M. They have OU. They have Bama on that schedule. So there are some hurdles, no two ways about that. But they could take a step back, still go 10-2, still make the playoff, but on the other side of that, they could take a step back, and depending on those bounce of ball plays, they could go 8-4 and miss out on something really special. But overall, I still think Eli Drinkwitz and company are really building something really awesome over there in Columbia, Missouri. I look at 2024 as one of those years where you had so many things go right in 2023, it's almost bound to come back down to earth in 2024. But would be really, really interesting to see, and I think all of those. This is a conference that is impossible to get a beat on because I don't know which of these teams is going to be really disappointing. I tend to lean to a couple of teams in particular, but I can't get a beat on him. I'll be totally honest with you. And on Tuesday, I will do my best to get a beat on him and make sure that I make the pick that I feel most confident in. I have one that I feel okay about right now, but there's definitely some question marks. So it'll be really, really fun to unpack all of that next week with you all, because there's going to be some takes that are going to make you guys mad. I'm just going to put that out there right now so we're all on the same page as we go into next week, because I'm going to make some people mad. I'm going to make some people think I'm crazy, and that's just the way of the world when you're making college football picks, especially for this season. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We just have incredible people doing really good work across every single sport you could possibly want. So come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But once again, thank you for listening, and I will see you guys on Monday for some picks.
Mm-hmm.